So after covering the basics of the class and the logistics, we're going to talk a little bit about the general landscape of cyber threats that we are faced with, and also how we can cope with all the different kinds of angles and issues and whatnot. Learning goals for the next 2 hours are just being aware of the basic properties of security and privacy. Again, like this is developing a common language so that we can use a set of definitions that we can all use throughout this course. Get an overview of some cyber threats, break the attack life cycle into different steps, and also start reasoning about what the goals of an attacker are, and then differentiate different classes of cyber threats. So let's start with the basics, or different kind of basic principles. We're going to start with confidentiality, and confidentiality is one of the key basic properties that describes how to keep information secret. For example, the recipe of Coca-Cola, your password, or like some other sensitive information. So confidentiality describes how you can ensure that this data remains confidential. So the idea is that you give read access only to those who actually need to know, which means that you prohibit read access for anybody else. Approaches could be access control, sealing, encryption, or whatnot. And in this example here, in the image, confidentiality would mean that the attacker cannot hear what you say, right? So you're somehow prohibiting the attacker from hearing. And this could be that you look around and ensure that nobody's nearby. You make sure that there's nobody pointing a microphone, a directed microphone at you. You ensure that the device hasn't been tampered with, like the phone. And some of the younger people in the room, this is considered a phone booth. You may not have seen one, but they used to exist where you walk up, you have a Swiss franc, you throw it in, and then you can do a 5-minute call. They used to exist, which was also great for privacy because you could just make a phone call from anywhere without your mobile provider knowing where you are. They've gone pretty much extinct, but they used to exist. So yeah, that's a way to also recognize old movies. I was on a flight recently, just a very quick story. Who knows Fight Club, the movie? Okay, a lot of you. It's also a great 90s movie. I loved it when it came out. I just turned 18 the year it came out, so it was an amazing movie. Obviously, you should not talk about Fight Club. Magic, okay. And when rewatching the movie, it holds up really, really well. IKEA is still a thing. All the different areas, economic issues, all still a thing. Works really, really well. There's 2 things that are really, really weird. There's no cell phones, no smartphones in the movie. Nobody's they're doing calls locally, and CRT monitors. You know CRT monitors, right? The old cathode ray monitors. That's also how you see the technology actually evolves, right? Movies can hold up really, really well, but in some little places you see that something is just off. But other than that, the movie held up really, really well. Same for Matrix, right? Matrix is also a movie that came out in 1999. This was the best year for movies, I think. And in Matrix, still holds up really, really well, but they're using the old flip phones that pop up, and they're using the phone booths to get out of the Matrix. Right. Who has seen Matrix? Cool. So if you haven't, those are 2 movies to add to your watch list. and play with it. So confidentiality, right? You're ensuring that the attacker cannot hear what you say. And this could also be ensuring that the data on the phone is encrypted towards the other end. You're restricting physical access to the phone booth. You're making sure that you get into the phone booth and the phone booth is closed. It's insulated against sound or whatnot. Another basic property is integrity. You ensure that information remains correct. Your account balance on the bank, result of votes, like some private information you want to ensure that nobody can tamper with. And here the goal is you prevent modification of data. That's the best option. You're only allowing some modifications by trusted parties, and you prevent any modification of the data through somebody else, through somebody who doesn't have the right to do so. The second best approach is that you at least detect the modification. And there's two interesting angles here. You can detect the modification right when the data is being written or modified, or when the modified data is being used. And from a security analysis perspective, there's an interesting trade-off, right? It comes at different costs. Preventing modification may be like an expensive operation. Detecting modification can be much cheaper. And detecting modified data only when it is being used can be even cheaper than detecting the modification, right? So if you are implementing security primitives, you have to consider what kind of integrity guarantees do I need? Do I need to prevent the modification, or do I only need to be able to detect that data has been tampered with when I'm using it? And this gives you different kind of mechanisms. Some approaches could be adding a hash, a MAC signature, or simply making the data public, right? If the data is public and there's hundreds of copies out there, you can actually make sure that at least some of the copies agree. An attacker would have to modify all the different copies at the same time to get a majority vote. And then you can work with the probabilities. Like if you take a random sample of n copies, how likely is it that an attacker was able to compromise all of these copies? Now, integrity in this example would mean that the attacker cannot modify, replace, or remove what you say. As in, the attacker cannot like blank out individual parts that you're saying, or use an AI-generated system to replace your voice with the attacker, right, for example. So this is integrity. Integrity ensures that data cannot be tampered with in one way or another. I'll do a magic. Yeah, good, works. So integrity ensures that data cannot be tampered with. Next basic principle is availability. You want to make sure that your system remains available. Keep information available and keep systems running. For example, your web shop, your email server or whatnot, so that you remain reachable. Or keeping your phone connected, right? And this protects against denial of service. Like an attacker may be interested in just stopping you from like providing your service. For your web shop, this could be, for example, your competitor who also has a web shop, right? And if your web shop is not reachable, you may, like the customer may be shopping at your competitor. So instead of having cheaper prices, one of the options could be to just be available compared to you, right? If you're not available, you cannot shop in your store. Or it could also be extortion, right? It would be a shame if your web shop were not reachable, and I would bring it down. Like, so it could be like a threat of extortion. So availability ensures that your services remain available. And this could be either making copies. Again, like you could replicate your service across different geographical regions, duplicate distributor systems, prevent intrusions detected, relay traffic or whatnot. So here is the example would be that the attacker cannot terminate your call. If you are in a call, you remain in the call, and the attacker is unable to do that. Now, for all of these different examples, you can think about the threat modeling, right? When we are looking at attacks, or when we're looking at security of a system, we always have to model the cost for an attacker or the capabilities of an attacker. So this is not restricted to availability here, but being able to terminate your call could be different, could be carried out at different levels of attack. The attacker could push you over and just hang up the phone. The attacker could destroy the phone in one way or another, right? Just like banging it up or making sure that you can no longer use it. The attacker could cut the connection at the phone booth itself. Well, the attacker could destroy your the relay system that relays the phone calls. The attacker could also nuke the city that you're in, right? So there's very different levels of an attacker that an attacker can do, which are more or less realistic, right? And when you're looking at security and when you're defining what kind of attacks you defend against, you have to be very much aware of how powerful the attacker is. And we'll discuss this a little bit when we're looking at actual threats. The next basic property is authenticity. And here the idea is to demonstrate the authenticity of information. For example, if you have a gift card, like you're saying, I have a gift card for your store for 200 Swiss francs. If you make 5 copies of it and you try to spend the 5 copies, that's also a question of authenticity. Can you replicate it? Can you ensure that it's only the one valid copy? Or you create fake gift certificates or whatnot. This could also be the website of a bank, right? Do you know like that when you're entering your credentials that you're actually accessing the website of your bank, or the one of the like a fake website that's trying to phish your credentials to steal all your money. Here, the approach would be to prevent fake information and detect modification or tampering. But again, there's like a differentiation between, like, are you the company or are you the user? And here, with authenticity, as users, we have to be aware of some of the possible attacks as well. You could add a keyed hash, a MAC, or a signature, and whatnot. This is also called integrity of origin sometimes. And here, this would mean that the attacker cannot impersonate you, again, using the AI system. So the attacker cannot speak in your voice or just replay some of the recordings that you had. So this means that you are the person making, like the person making the phone call, that you're the person who is actually calling at the moment and giving this information. Last but not least, non-repudiation, which means that it prevents the denial of a statement. For example, if you're sending money from your account to somebody else, you cannot claim that you've never sent them money and then send it to another party at the same time. Like after you have made the payment, there's a log somewhere on a ledger that says, hey, you have transferred 500 Swiss francs from X to Y. Right? So there's a proof of the action or proof of the statement. And this could be, for example, adding a signature as proof of origin. If you're signing your payment order, either with like your actual signature or with a cryptographic signature, you're proving that you authorize this order. And this could be, there's a recording, a signed recording of the conversation that you're having that proves that you actually did this conversation. Right? So these are the 5 basic principles that we are looking at, and we'll use this throughout the rest of the course. Now, all of these principles come from a kind of security perspective. If you think about privacy, it's a very different angle. Privacy, there's confidentiality in privacy as well, and some of these concepts show up in other areas. So if you're looking at privacy, confidentiality would mean that we keep information about the data subject confidential compared to the data owner, right? With privacy, we care about a person owning data, right? And in privacy, confidentiality means that the data of an individual remains private and confidential, not the data of the company. So you would give limited access only to those who need to know. And this can again be access control, encryption, or absence of data. So you would keep these aspects secret and protected. Another basic privacy property would be anonymity. And here, the goal would be to prevent a link between the data and the subject, as in the postal address and the age to a person. And there's been interesting studies that, thanks to a lot of secondary information, you can actually leak a lot of personal detail about an individual. So you have to reduce or modify the information until this correlation. And here, the example was postal address and age to an actual person, which was sufficient to uniquely identify individual people somewhere in the US. Different approaches that we'll talk about are K-anonymity, differential privacy, and so on. For privacy, one of the basic properties and one of the ideals to look at is just absence of information. So ideally, when you're designing a system that is privacy aware, you should try to not store data. Like, your main goal should be to minimize the amount of data that you store. And this is a very European approach to data processing. In the US and many other parts in the world, the approach to data processing is we will store as much as we can about our users to make sure that we can potentially use this data later on. The European approach, also in part due to some of the privacy laws, is to store as little data as possible. That should be your goal as well when you're implementing system. So the goal would be to reduce the amount of data that you have. Query databases without the database seeing what you are querying, like keeping that hidden. Train machine learning mod without revealing training data. Confirming a vote without knowing what the vote is. Minimize the amount of data that is being transferred, minimize the amount of data that is visible. One option could be, one implementation could be to work on encrypted information instead. Their tools could be homomorphic encryption, private information retrieval, or zero knowledge proof as one of these different angles. That's one area of privacy that's being worked on when you actually have to store information, but the best approach is just to not store any information at all if you can. So if you look at differentiating privacy and security, security protects the data of data owners, as in the company. Like, here the focus is on the company against attacks, and privacy protects the data subject, the person about whom the data is, against abuse, right? So it's slightly different angles. A security breach can compromise both the data owner, the company that reveals the information, but also the data subject if there's private information being entailed as being shared. So we'll have to look at both different angles. It's like two different perspectives to look at when data is being stolen or being used. It's obviously in the company's best interest to have good security, or so you would hope. But it's also a fact that many of the companies are repeatedly compromised if they are storing any kind of data. Protecting the privacy of its customers does not always have a benefit for a data owner, right? So they may be making money out of partial abuse of your privacy. So if you think about social networks, right, their main business model is sharing private information, making private information available, but also, even without making this directly visible to anybody out there, learning on this data, on who has access to whom, what the different connections are, and how all of this ties up, right? So they're trying to make as much money from you by selling you ads to some extent. The European perspective, again, is that we need strong laws to force these companies to protect the user privacy through, example, GDPR or other approaches that the EU is pushing. And alternatively, building privacy by design. When we as researchers work on privacy aspects, we're trying to design mechanisms that inherently incorporate the privacy aspects that achieve the goal they were designed for while minimizing threats to privacy. You may remember, like 4 years ago, there was the thing that caused all of us to stay at home, which was not much fun for neither you nor me. And part of the solution, like I'm talking about the COVID pandemic, part of the solution was before the vaccine was available, the idea was that we need to figure out who was in contact with whom to slow the spread of the virus, right? Because transmission was really, really quick. There was a lot of risk going on. So a lot of the governments were opting for, we need to track where all our people are. Which, if you trust your government, even if you trust your government, like I don't want the Swiss government to know where I am at any given point in time. And there's other governments I trust much less than the Swiss government. So governments were trying to push for massively privacy invasive tracing of where people are, and then using the information of where people are to infer with whom they've been in contact with, to if they get COVID, to actually quickly quarantine all these people around them. Because a classic approach for pandemics is you figure out with whom a person that got sick was in contact with, and then you put them into quarantine to make sure that they cannot infect others. Right? It's a very common approach. It used to rely on people calling and doing interviews, but this obviously breaks down in current generations. So governments were looking for an automated approach. So the goal is to track whom you were in contact with and then warn these people. The simplest possible approach that governments wanted to use was, let's just track everybody. Which could work, it would achieve the goal, but it has a huge disadvantage for users, as the government now knows where everybody is. So when we were working on this, and I was part of the Swiss team of researchers that developed the distributed privacy-preserving proximity tracing, that's quite a mouthful, that was then actually implemented worldwide to track this. And the idea was that you measure, like everybody is emitting like Bluetooth beacons, and we're using Bluetooth distance approximation to figure out whom you are in contact with. And then if a person is infected, they only need to publish their personal tokens that they distributed. Meaning that you can, like everybody can check once a day, twice a day, once a week, if they were in contact with anyone. So the computation happens locally. Like you're only publishing the anonymous IDs of people that were infected and were opting to release this information. But then everybody can check locally if they were actually exposed. Which means that the government doesn't need to collect any location data at all, and everybody can do the calculation if they were exposed locally. Right? So this is a huge step forward in privacy, because the government or any other entity doesn't need to collect any of this information at all. It's also a very lightweight framework that fully protects and ensures people's privacies, because at any point in time you can decide if you want to take part in this network or not. Right? So it gives flexibility. It was designed with minimizing data and thereby protecting and enforcing privacy guarantees. And interestingly, this was the first time that like the two big companies, Apple and Google, actually worked together, and they implemented both our standard that we developed and rolled this out on a worldwide basis. It turns out that we saved some lives, which is good. Like as a computer scientist, otherwise it's fairly hard to say that you've saved lives. Usually in a self-driving car, if you're developing self-driving cars, you often like kill people because you're not doing that well, or there's other accidents. But it was an interesting experience to also give governments an option to spread this dangerous virus before vaccines were available, Now that vaccines are available, it's everybody's choice, right, to vaccinate themselves or not. But before vaccines were available, to ensure that it gives you like additional safety guarantees while still enforcing the privacy of people and respecting the privacy of people and giving them the choice to play along. So it's an interesting lesson also for me. This was my first exploration into privacy and privacy protocols, which was a very interesting learning experience for me, how to actually design and minimize this. Other than that, I'm much more of a systems person who's interested in like making security primitives fast, not necessarily thinking about the people too much. But that was an interesting angle to actually think about people and help them in one way or another. So as like you graduate with your master and you're becoming software engineers or team leads, think about what data you collect, what you as the data owner or your company as the data owner will be able to do, but also think about the data subjects and how you can minimize the amount of data that you need to store about individuals while still providing the service that is being required. So these are some of the interesting differences between security and privacy overall. If we move on to, like, or if we remain on the focus of software development, what you may know is the software or system development lifecycle. And we'll use this as an example to later talk about the security lifecycle. So if you're not aware of the software or system development lifecycle, software development usually happens in phases. Whenever you start on a project, you look at requirements. What does my software need to do? Ideally, you write this down. You have a list of, like, my software should be able to display cat pictures on the screen that I downloaded over the internet using this protocol. Right? So this could be one of the requirements that you can write down. With a bunch of other requirements. And then you define, for these requirements, I need to have this, this, and that functionality. I need to have network connectivity. I need to have an image processing library. I need to have a different kind of interface that allows me to enter what cat picture I want to see. I need to have some other mechanism to, like, display something on the screen, interact with, and whatnot. So you're defining the requirements. You're defining the needs for your software, then you're actually designing how the system should look like, how it should interact, how the different components should fit together. Then you spend some time implementing. Then hopefully you're spending some time testing the software using different kind of test vectors. For testing, we need both functional testing, as in does it work as intended, but also what happens if I throw random crap at it, right? What happens if if you think like an attacker, what kind of control does an attacker have? And then you evolve the system over time as the requirements change, and you keep repeating the software development cycle. Testing, as I just mentioned, in a classic software development cycle is usually focused on only functionality. If you look at this from a security perspective, you also have to assess the security life cycle, where you assess the different risks, you figure out what possible issues could happen, you're listing the different attack vectors, then you're establishing a policy. How should the policy look like? How should you react to different threats? Terminate the application. You want to keep it running in a degraded form. You want to adjust. How do you react? Then implement. You have to actually implement the policy, or at least figure out how to react if it happens. And then you operate by deploying the policy, and you keep maintaining it over time. Now, if you look at the risk assessment, right, you're looking at what possible risks are for your system. You identify assets. This is the data I want to protect. These are the threats, and then you figure out what kind of possible attack vectors could there be, right? Data you want to protect, threats, attack vectors. You analyze the corresponding risk, Like how likely is it going to happen, and what is the impact going to be if it happens? Right, what's the probability? How likely is it going to impact, and what happens if it happens? And then you evaluate which risks are acceptable and which risks must be treated. Now, when I was a young and naive student, I always thought that we should strive for bug-free software. Like this was the ideal case, right? I was writing code. Obviously, my code was beautiful. I never had any bugs in my code at all. So I assumed everybody else would write bug-free code as well. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't scale, right? Code will always have bugs, and there's going to be more bugs that you can fix. This is super annoying, by the way. Sorry about that. I'm not sure if it is this cable here that's breaking. Yeah, likely. Let me pull this up here and hope it fits. And I'm not going to touch it again. Next week, I'm going to bring a clicker to advance slides. Sorry about that. So yeah, the assumption here is the issue here is with risk assessment. There's going to be more bugs than you can actually fix. I'm sure you're not really aware of this, or you're likely not really aware of this yet. But Microsoft for Office had a list of tens of thousands of bugs that were reported. They have a limited amount of programmers, right? Like they don't have the resources to fix all of these bugs. And sometimes some of the issues with certain functionality was mutually exclusive with other functionality, right? So fixing a bug in an input parser would result in an incompatibility that an old format would no longer be possible to be used, right? So you have to decide, like, what do I take? What do I fix? Same for the Linux kernel. There's a testing platform that we'll look at in the automated testing class, where there's tens of thousands of bugs that were found in the Linux kernel, many of which have been fixed. But at any point in time, like if you go to the sysbot homepage, at any point in time, there's 1,000 to 2,000 open bugs in the Linux kernel that are unassigned. Right? There's just so many bugs out there, many of which will be security critical. So you'll have to do some risk assessment. Which bugs do you want to fix first? Right? So you have to analyze what's the risk, how easy is it to exploit, and how do you adjust, right? So you're looking at this matrix. If the probability is low and the impact is low, sure, you're going to record it, but are you going to fix it right away? No, you want to fix the bugs that are high impact at high probability, right? So you want to really prioritize those bugs. And in the risk assessment, you're trying to kind of like note down on how the different trade-offs are to figure out a good way to balance your efforts. Next, you need to establish some kind of policy. And think of this like an architect that is looking at a house and establishing common policies on how to route wastewater, fresh water, like how to heat the water, where to have the electricity plugs. Think of it as establishing policy for a certain project, and you need to do the same for security. What is allowed, what is not allowed, how to protect data, personal data. Actually, what is personal data has been established in the risk assessment. Now we need to figure out what do we do with the personal data. So we know that we are collecting, we're doing a fitness tracker, right? Let's say we're doing a fitness tracker. So we're collecting personal data. This could be GPS traces of people running outside somewhere. This could be heart rate monitoring throughout the day for tracking sleep cycles or whatnot. So we do have personal data. Do we want to keep it locally? Ideally, we should keep it local, but maybe the company wants to do some heavyweight crunching on data or aggregate, like think of Strava or whatnot, some other fitness platform where they want to share data, right? So what do they do with all the personal data they don't necessarily show on the platform? Do they want to encrypt it? Do they want to limit it? Do they want to strip it? Do they want to, like, what kind of policies do they want to enforce on the data? Same as if you're a company, right? At EPFL, it could be a cyber attack against some of the core systems. Do we want to enforce antivirus endpoint security scanning on the systems? What about all the bring your own device systems that students are bringing? Should we do two-factor authentication, right, to protect these data? Because very likely with a campus of 20,000 people, very likely there's a bunch of accounts being compromised each day. And with two-factor, we're making the compromise a bit harder, right, or harder to exploit. What kind of backup strategy do we need for the data? Do we test it and whatnot? Also name a data protection officer and who's responsible to think about this so they can look at all the different angles and whatnot. After we have analyzed the risk, established a policy, we also need to implement it, which means that we need to actually encode the different policies and whatnot and implement them so they're actually being rolled out. After the risk assessment of the campus network and establishing the policy, we have now implemented a new two-factor authentication solution for several of the services, such as webmail and whatnot, to make sure that your personal email is being protected. Your personal email, but also my personal email that contains, for example, salary information or information about grants that we are receiving, or potentially vulnerabilities that we have reported to the different manufacturers, right? So it's being implemented and where the policies are clearly laid out, defined, and making them enforceable so that you can enforce the given security policies that you defined in the first two steps. Then during operation, you actually make sure that you maintain these security properties and you enforce and apply the properties in practice. Which means that every now and then, every couple of months, you go back through the documents, figure out what have you learned, what has changed outside, and you adjust and you adapt and you kind of like make sure that they are still current and still hold to whatever you need. So there's a nice set of different kind of aspects of the security lifecycle that need to fit together, and you keep repeating this as you go along. Very good. As a case study, I want to talk a little bit about the XZ or libs LZMA backdoor. Who heard about this in the press? I would say about 20% of people. Who heard about it in a class? Okay. Fewer. So this was a huge vulnerability. Like a supply chain attack. What's a supply chain attack? Does anybody know what a supply chain attack is? Yeah?
It is in the software industry in general. There are many components, libraries that come together, and now you're trying to attack the software. You're trying to attack one of those libraries, one of the small pieces, to actually exploit a bigger thing.
Yep. So supply chain attack is like usually a piece of software consists of many pieces, as you said. You don't need to attack the main software. You don't need to find a bug in the main software. You only need to find a bug in any of the pieces that that are being used for the software. Also, there's a lot of different developers working on all these different pieces of software. So you may be able to gain the trust of one of these developers in the chain. And one of the key issues, or one of the key aspects of software, is that like all your for one application, usually asterisks conditions apply. All the code is running with the same privileges, which means that whenever you include a library, you are fully trusting the library, and the library gets the same privileges and resources that your main application has. And especially for web development or Python programming, where, oh, I just want to use this library, pip install, whatever, OpenAI processing, brings in 400 different libraries. You're now trusting all these 400 different libraries. And I'm not so sure if you should trust them, right? If I'm sure student code is great, but very likely half of these libraries were hacked together with a student just making their project work, right? So there's interesting aspects there about security, and all of this runs at the same privileges. So liblzma is a compression library that's used in, like it's a very efficient compression and decompression library that gives you very high compression rates. Interestingly, this is used in many different pieces of software, including unpacking the Linux kernel when it's booting, but also in a lot of other software that is using this somewhere as an aspect of it. Interestingly, this was also used in OpenSSH as part of compressing some of the channels when data is being sent through an OpenSSH channel. OpenSSH, for the Windows people, is a way to log into a remote machine and to actually interact with the terminal of the remote machine. Like if you're logging into a server to update or change certain aspects, you're usually logging in through SSH. It authenticates the user and allows the user or administrator to update server machines. liblzma was being used as part of this tool chain to compress data in the channel where data is being sent through SSH. And the backdoor allowed a takeover of a malicious takeover to escalate their privileges. Let's continue the discussion on the liblzma backdoor, which is it's a masterpiece of engineering, extremely well laid out and extremely well planned. So as we established right before the break, liblzma is a compression library that is used in a lot of different software. And this was used in a supply chain attack where a backdoor was planted in liblzma, which triggered whenever people logged in through SSH. Right? So the goal was to have a backdoor when somebody logged in through SSH and provided a correct cryptographic key, like a challenge through a cryptographic key. It would log in as root, as the system administrator. An extremely powerful backdoor available on any system that was running this piece of software. Now, liblzma is like a well-designed compression library that has been around for quite a while. It was maintained by one single person, essentially. Right? It's used everywhere. It's fairly stable, so it didn't need any new functionalities, any new features. But it was being maintained by one single person. And then this attacker, Yia Tan, contributed for over 3 years to gain community trust. And what they did is they created test files, they created test vectors, a bunch of things, helped with code review, helped with improving certain aspects of the code, and then gained trust by the key developer that then added them to the maintainers list. And with the maintainer access, they pushed the backdoor into liblzma that was then very well hidden through a bunch of test files, a bunch of test vectors, that only when the library was compiled for a very particular system for the use of inclusion with a couple of special features, then the backdoor was active. So this was extremely well designed, extremely well laid out. And surprisingly, this issue was found by Andres Freund, who accidentally detected the backdoor when doing some performance testing on a database server. So Andres was logging into his database server, and sometimes, like for testing, it just took longer than after he issued an update. Right? And he recognized that suddenly, like, some of the logins are taking longer. There's like a weird performance anomaly when I'm interacting with my database server. And then he discovered that, like, hey, this anomaly, and traced it, that there's this weird function that's not there in the source code, right? So this weird function was only being added, and like if I put my NerdSpeak hat on, right? So the issue of the backdoor was hidden in an object file that was camouflaged as a test vector for a non-passing test case, when during the building for this specific environment, this object file was extracted and then integrated verbatim into the library, overriding certain symbols that when linked together with OpenSSH, hooked into some of the crypto primitives that allowed the attacker to gain access and compromise the system. Like extremely well designed, extremely well laid out, very hard to detect. So the attackers did like one stupid mistake where if you were not providing the right key, it just took too long, right? So they didn't do correct performance testing. So which by this random dude that was testing his database server figured out that, hey, suddenly it's taking like 200 milliseconds longer. Something must be off. And obviously it must be a conspiracy theory. Therefore he spent like 3 days analyzing it. And actually this time it was a conspiracy theory, right? So usually if something is 200 milliseconds off, it's like your own fault, or your router is off, or something else is happening. But this time it really was a conspiracy theory. And then they discovered this whole setup, assuming that like certain build systems were compromised, the main repositories were compromised, raising all these questions about what you trust. Like when you install a software update, what do you trust? Whom do you trust? Who builds the software? Who distributes the software? Who maintains the software? Right. So this was an extremely interesting case study. So some of the lessons learned. Right. That's one of my favorite XKCD comics. Like you've got this modern, like huge, massive systems. Google and Apple making billions of profit, and there's like this one single developer that has been maintaining this piece of open source code for free for the last 20-ish years. Right? And this poor soul is being pressured by governmental 3-letter agencies to that help them write test cases to include them into the maintainers list so they can roll out an attack against certain other parties. So some of the lessons learned: be aware of supply chain security. Right? Security is important. And a third-party library can cause remote code execution because everything is running at the same privileges. Testing can discover vulnerabilities, and interestingly, OSS Fuzz. This is one of the open source initiatives that Google is running to ensure and protect the open source ecosystem. It was modified to not find this bug, to actually hide this bug or this backdoor. And interestingly, right, it was the main maintainer that said, "Oh, we're excluding this test file that contained part of the backdoor," because they were the maintainer, right? So they had all the rights of keeping track of how bugs were being searched for and tested for in this system. So one of the other lessons is that we need to have ways to update software, even if it's being deployed anywhere, or to recover from any of these issues. And last but not least, open source developers are very much overwhelmed. And they are essentially unpaid volunteers that keep our software ecosystem running. So no matter if you're running Windows, Mac, or Linux, on your system, there's massive amounts, like tens of millions of lines of code, of open source systems that are running and being maintained by unpaid volunteers. Which, if you think about it, like I don't want to get too political, but the companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, they're making lots of profits. But they are using open source software to make these profits. So one of the questions should be, like, well, what should we do as a society? Should we rely on unpaid volunteers to do all of that? Or should some of these open source developers actually be paid by these large companies that are making the profits? Well, it's not going to be on an exam, but it's something for you to think about, right? So yeah, it's an interesting trade-off, right? These open source enables a lot of software, and like the developers are not doing open source to get paid in the first place, but then there's companies getting profits from this, and just maybe like another angle to look at. So interesting backdoor, interesting supply chain attack. Be aware of it, and like one of the key lessons here is that like any library that you run or any library that you include in your software, you absolutely trust. Like so, any code that is in any of the libraries that you use has the same privileges as all the code that you're writing. And if you're using a lot of different libraries, you're importing all the different issues and security risks that these libraries bring. Now, if you go towards more of the cyber threats, right? This is one of the examples of a cyber threat. A cyber threat is a potential cause of an unwanted incident which can result in harm to a system or organization. Well, a cyber threat is something that happens over an online system that impacts organizational operations, assets, or individuals through an information system via unauthorized access, destruction, disclosure, modification, yada, 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 right? Through, for example, a successful exploit of a particular vulnerability in your system. There's a bunch of different types of threats, if you think about them in a more general way. There's environmental threats. If you're running a company, if you're running a software system, right? There's environmental threats against your server center. It could be fire, it could be water, it could be pollution, it could be earthquakes, cosmic radiation that you may want to protect against, which may not be that much of an issue here, but for example, if you work in satellites, that becomes interesting. Warlike events that can happen here, riots that can happen here as well. Loss of essential services, you could be losing power, cooling, or communication. Technical failures, the disk could die, the power supply could die, a capacitor somewhere on your board could die. And then for cyber, this could be malicious software, denial of service attacks, social engineering, right? Somebody's taking one of your system administrators out for a beer and trying to get the root password from them, right? So you want to protect against that as well. Humans are part of the cybersecurity chain as well. So there's software vulnerabilities, exploits, and whatnot in addition to that. This lecture doesn't really cover, we don't really cover environmental threats, loss of essential services, or technical failures. We focus mostly on cyber threats. We're going to discuss some of the others in passing if they are tangentially related, but the focus is going to be on cyber, anything that can be done against a system. But also including a little bit the human component because it's equally important. I mean, even if you fix all the vulnerabilities, like if you get your system administrator to leak their password, there's not much you can do. Motivation for attacks, like why would somebody want to attack your system? And you should always ask the why questions because there's different attackers. In the 80s, it was for curiosity, fun, or fame. You wanted to be the person that hacked something, right? Now it's often profit-driven, right? Either small crime, organized crime, or industrial espionage for information. So it can be essentially for profit at any of these layers. Small crime could be a ransomware attack against your system from a small group. Organized crime, which is running larger scale ransomware attacks and whatnot. Or industrial espionage of other countries trying to extort information, or other, like your competitor trying to figure out how you implement something. It could be beliefs, which is also called hacktivism. So for example, Anonymous, LulzSec, Guardians of Peace and whatnot, that, for example, steal information and then release it publicly, right? So this can be for political or other kind of beliefs as is being done. Also national security, so this can be police forces or national intelligence. So, for example, police forces may want to read your chats or your chat logs. This can be done in many different ways because they're very much interested in any kind of crime you could have committed. And there's also political discussion on how much lawful interception should be allowed and how much this should scale towards any kind of communication between people. So for example, there's two general ways. Either they could access all the chats on a server if the server contains them in clear text, which could be discussed for Telegram, which is not using end-to-end encryption. If the chat protocol uses end-to-end encryption, such as Signal, for example, they will have to attack your local device. To attack your local device, they either need your consent or your fingerprint or your biometrics to access it, or they need to actually hack the device. And this can be, for example, through, I don't know, Bluetooth connection, USB plug or whatnot, or something else, right? So there's very different angles or layers for that. There's also profit angles, more on the darker side, getting like clicks through click farms, having lots of systems that try to click on ads so they can get money, spam or whatnot, reselling accounts. For example, if somebody compromises your system, they may be able to resell your X account, your I don't know, Facebook, WhatsApp, whatever other accounts you have, because they're nice and have a good, like aged, have a good reputation or whatnot. Rental of hacked PCs for botnets, where like if it's not a high-end gamer PC with a super expensive GPU, they don't really care about the compute, but they usually care about your bandwidth for denial of service attacks or whatnot. So you can bring down other systems. Or demanding ransom by encrypting your private files. And if you don't have a good backup or good backup strategy, you may be inclined to paying the fine. Like some of the gray sites could also be selling the vulnerabilities you discover to some broker, which is very interesting, right? In my group, we're actually developing techniques to find vulnerabilities. And to test these techniques, before we publish them, we have to test it on software. So we obviously find different kinds of vulnerabilities. What do we do with these vulnerabilities? Well, we are doing responsible disclosure, which means we go to the vendor and tell them, hey, you have a vulnerability here. Go ahead and fix it. This is a test case to reproduce it. Now please do something about it. Companies often say thank you, take it along, and then they fix it. But you don't get anything for it. We could sell this on different kind of platforms where there's different layers from like light gray to very dark gray, if you want to consider that. Like you could sell it to very certain states, or you could sell it through intermediate brokers where they likely end up, for example, with a friendly force or something that's considered more friendly source. But it's a broad range of whom you would sell it to. And the darker you get, usually the more money you get for the exploits. So you get, like, let's say, if you responsibly disclose it and there's a bug bounty, you get $1,000. If you disclose it through a broker, you can get 100,000. If you expose it to a like very dark gray, you can get up to $1 million for the same approach. So you get like 3 orders of magnitude, 4 orders of magnitude more cash. Right? So it really depends what you need to do and what you invest in, where your morals are. I suggest taking the high road, but it's easier said than done. Right? It can be tempting to actually make money on the side. What's the value of a hacked PC? Let's assume you didn't install your updates, or you clicked on a stupid link that installed malware on your system. There's a bunch of different angles in here. It's very hard to see. So there's bot activity, for example, reaching out to other networks or whatnot. Account credentials, so your system is going to be scanned for lots of different accounts that are then being resold, or account tokens. So especially if you've already logged in, like there's lots of tokens that are somewhere in your browser cache that are being sold. especially like if you have an AWS, Google Cloud, whatever account. They will happily use the compute credits that you have available. Searching for credit cards, other kind of financial credentials, banking access, that's certainly something. Ransomware attacks, these are the classic approach, but a bunch of others as well, right? So a hacked PC can be used for many different things, and they're usually being access to your system is being resold to many parties, and it's like a whole economic system where there's different groups specialized for spamming, like phishing for your accounts, getting you to click on things. Others running old end-day attacks, like bugs that haven't been patched that you may not have patched for a while, and then reusing them in different ways or forms. Quick note on terminology, like I brought this up as a side, or I use this implicitly here. An O-day is like 0 day or O-day. This is considered a bug that is not known to the vendor. If you write an exploit using O-days, this means that there's no patch against it. So anybody running this software would be vulnerable, right? So if you're writing an O-day exploit, usually this gives you, these are the most expensive types of exploit because there's no patch against it except for turning off the system. So they usually come at a higher price, and let's say, NSA, CIA, FBI, whatever they want to use it, they're going to use it a couple of times, and then it will be known, right? As soon as it is known, Google Chrome security team will detect exploitation in the wild, and then start figuring out, maybe capturing and developing a patch against it. Then there's going to be a patch, which is going to be deployed to everyone. If you install the patch, you're good, but if you don't install the patch, then you remain vulnerable. But usually, like developing an end-to-end exploit for an O-day costs $100,000 to $1 million. Very likely, your data is not worth a $1 million exploit. My data is likely not worth a $1 million exploit. So these exploits are used in a very targeted manner, targeting one particular person, one particular environment. After being used a couple of times, there's going to be a defense against it. If you install the patch, you'll be protected against this vulnerability. But then there's the secondary market where other malware gangs analyze the patch, extract the original bug, and can then attack everybody that hasn't patched yet. So this is much cheaper, right? And also, you're no longer targeting one single person or a group of persons. You're targeting everyone, right? So you also need a lower, like the value of the individual that you're attacking is much lower, but the cost of the attack is also lower, and you can scale it much further, right? So this is secondary layer of attacks. As soon as bugs are being patched. There's a whole economic behind it, with groups being specialized for finding bugs, groups for specializing on writing exploits, groups for writing the extraction of information post-exploitation, groups for analyzing patches after the developers deployed them, that then create these secondary aspects. So it's this whole range of dark economy in there, which is very, very fascinating as well. To observe, of course, not to participate. So if you're developing a cyber attack against the system, right, you're going through different phases as well. The first phase, or the initial phase, the setup phase, is you're trying to find a target. Like, whom do you want to attack? Everyone or focused, the individual? You need to figure out who helps you, and then you need to build and acquire tools. You can either buy the exploits on the market, you can buy the bugs on the market, or you can actually figure out what software your target is using, and then trying to find the bugs and develop the exploit yourself. Right? So you research your target, infrastructure, and people. You test for detection. You try to figure out what their defense capabilities are. Then you gain access, either through social engineering, as in you get the system administrator drunk and like steal their password. You can write exploits. You can find other ways to access or whatnot. You gain initial foothold. This is usually the first step of exploitation. You get some kind of foothold, some kind of account or initial computation or whatnot. So you get some connection to the target system. And this is where you no longer care about humans, right? The first step, the initial access could be by tricking a human or by executing an exploit. So after gaining access, you maintain access. So the idea here is that you strengthen your foothold. You're going for persistence, lateral movement. So from the initial system that you have compromised, you're trying to get access to a bunch of other systems. Like from one user, you want to become like the domain controller or like administrator, root, expand access, get different kind of credentials, collect all the tokens that are floating around in the network or whatnot. So phase 2 is maintaining access and spreading your access a bit, followed by completing the mission where you try to exfiltrate data, manipulate, sabotage data, encrypt all the files or whatnot. That's phase 3. The last phase then is covering your track. For example, deleting any kind of log files, cleaning up the system, or just wreaking havoc and destroying the systems that you've left behind, right? Which makes this very hard to recover data from, right? So these are the 4 or 5 different phases, how you can break a cyber attack into the different steps. There's, as I mentioned before, right, there's different kind of attacks. The non-targeted shotgun approach is like you're trying to attack everyone out there. This is usually done for N days that have already been used in a targeted manner, but now they're used up. They are cheap to buy, right? They're very cheap to get, or like phishing, right? If you're not doing spare phishing, you may be writing an email, hey, your EPFL account is almost full. Please click on this link to expand the access to your keep access to your EPFL email or whatnot. They're usually not stealthy, fully automated, and the goal is often like short-term financial gains and often considered very low risk to attackers, right? Attackers can easily scale this and are fairly easy to pull off. It's also a possible starting point for more sophisticated attacks. So maybe if your admin clicks on a link, compromises their account, you could be using this as a stepping stone to then write an email from the admin account to the CEO account, right? That then asks, hey, this is the file that you looked at. Please click on it, and thereby compromise the CEO account, or yeah, from the CEO account to the system administrator or whatnot. So you can move around. This can be malware, infected spam, extortion spam, malicious ads, worms, and whatnot. If you look at malware, like this is sent broadly to many people, as in usually not targeted. Very crude customization, as in the Swiss post or a package has been held at customs for you, please click on it. So you're trying to do some customization, and then the attachment contains well-known malware that either your antivirus or anything else will clearly signal. Malware spam, like these are usually sent broadly to many people, also not targeted, and campaigns are live just for a few hours. So the image here, I should have explained this before. The image here shows it like yes, this. I ran this on VirusTotal. This was an email I received. Run it on VirusTotal. 39 of the different systems already said that this is some kind of malware that is well known and vulnerable. Extortion usually says, hey, I know one of your passwords is. Interestingly, these usually contain some of your real old passwords that have been leaked somewhere on a website, and thereby claim that they know your password and want to get money from you or try to trick you into sending them money in one form or another. Usually this relies on leaked information, right? You may be surprised to be reading your password there, But websites are often, websites are being attacked as well. Whenever a website is being attacked, the first thing that usually is being extracted is the list of user accounts. List of user accounts, if the website developers were not doing their job correctly, may contain passwords in clear text, right? So the first thing an attacker does after they compromise a website and download the user accounts, they try to take your email address and the password you use and then log in many different other websites, potentially allowing them to escalate their privileges and gain access to your accounts on other websites. After, in a second step, they're selling your username and password after they have already taken over all your accounts on all the different platforms, and then try to extort money from you by telling you, hey, this was your password, now send me money or I will do bad things. And even if you've changed the password, the attackers usually buy lists of many passwords that are being curated by a group that is then the point I'm trying to make is there's many different steps involved. There's one group that attacks your server, attacks a server, extracts information, and uses it for escalation, taking over accounts. In the second step, the password list is being sold to another group. This group may be collecting these different password lists and aggregating them to a larger package. This package is then being sold to the next party where they are trying to extort money from you or try other kind of logins in any way or form. So it's all these different layers and all these different steps, which may be surprising because they have some information about you that they thought was private. And psychologically, this is a very, very good, very interesting trick because they're trying to escalate their foothold they get by catching you on in a semi-vulnerable state. Hacktivism, I mentioned this before, right? Could have several meanings and several aspects. The politically motivated hacking, or a variant of the anarchic civil disobedience to some extent. Good options could be you create software to encrypt communications, right? To prohibit a government that is interested in getting access to your communication from spying on you. So this is good hacktivism. Create tools to bypass censorship, especially if you are, from our Western standards, this is a good form of hacktivism. From these other governments, it's not. Cyber threats is also a form of hacktivism, website defacement. You are attacking a party that you do not agree with and you're trying to deface their website, or publication of confidential data, or distributed denial of service attacks, where you're taking control of a large amount of bots and trying to bring down other systems. A bunch of examples of hacktivism, the Panama Papers, releasing financial information about offshore companies by a hacking group, Epic data breach, different kind of customer personal data, credit card information that was leaked, Op Russia, where Anonymous launched cyber operations against the Russian Federation, whatnot. There's a bunch of different angles. It depends on your political stance a bit, on where you stand, but it's all forms of illegal hacktivism of some extent, right? So you have to be aware of the scale and also the legal aspects. One more note, you often read in the press about APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat. So one more terminology for you to add. APT means it's an advanced and persistent and a threat. Advanced means it's targeted, multi-step, often using specialized tools, often starts first with a spear phishing attack, creating a customized phishing attack against only certain individuals. Persistent, which means it goes over a long time. They try to get a foothold, make sure that they are deep in the system over a long time. And threats, they are coordinated by humans, so this is not automated, which usually means that this is more expensive, more costly, with a clear goal that is well defined by some form of like three-letter agency trying to extract as much information as possible. And interestingly, all the different countries are playing this game against each other. Yeah, there's a large exchange of information, let's just put it that way, where they're trying to grab information across all the different layers. Classes of malware, there's different kind of malicious software. Malware is just malicious software that we're defining. A virus spreads by infecting other files. Worm spreads automatically to other systems, self-replicating itself. That's why it's called a worm. A Trojan is malware hidden in useful software. So if you're downloading the free version of Photoshop, it may not be as free as you thought it would be. Rootkit, hiding presence of malware on a computer. Ransomware is then malware that encrypts your files and extracts, tries to get money for decryption. Nation-state malware, finally, is a malware developed by a nation-state trying to get only used in very targeted environments. I think I brought this up before already, the botnets. I used this in passing. Like, if you are being compromised, your system could be used in a botnet. The Mirai botnet is another such example. And here the idea is that this is compute for hire. Think of it as getting access to a large amount of machines and using them to run attacks against certain targets. This could be often to bring down websites where they're just being overwhelmed with millions to billions of requests per second. And if you have control over a lot of systems, it's very easy to write a script that just accesses the same web page again and again until it is overwhelmed and can no longer react. Social engineering. All right, this is hacking humans to some extent, which is very interesting. So you're using psychological tricks to manipulate other humans. If you've seen Mr. Robot, he's using this quite a bit as well to get information from other people, especially when he's talking to them, like using phishing, baiting, tailgating, just or different kind of approaches to gain people's trust, and then like extract information from them that you otherwise should not have. Prevented by awareness, training, robust security measures and whatnot. So for example, tailgating is an interesting social engineering technique where like you're just entering the building, a secured building after someone, and you try to convince them to hold open the door for you. Like, so an easy way is you're observing when people enter the building. You usually pick a busy period. You show up with a big bag of office supplies, and you're just following somebody, and they will hold the door open for you and letting you into the facility that is usually access controlled, because it would be so cumbersome for you to get out your badge and log in, right? So you still need to verify the badges of those people, and you need to be aware of that. And it's very easy because, like, as humans, we're often trying to help, right? And a social engineer will try to exploit your inherent like offer to help, which is an interesting way to trick humans into doing things they don't want to or shouldn't want to. Vulnerabilities and exploits. A vulnerability, like just for the definition, is a weakness in the logic, the software, or hardware of a system, as in a bug that is reachable by the attacker. Like, all software has bugs. Some of the bugs are vulnerabilities. A bug becomes a vulnerability if the attacker can have some input that reaches the bug. A POC, or proof of concept, demonstrates the existence of vulnerabilities. It's a certain piece of input that triggers the underlying bug, thereby demonstrating that it's a vulnerability. An exploit is a POC that achieves the attacker's goal. Like a POC for a bug could just be like an arbitrary memory corruption that terminates the program through an illegal access. There would be a POC that demonstrates the existence of the vulnerability. The exploit would be modifying this POC so that the attacker gets arbitrary code execution, full control of the system. Zero-day exploit, I mentioned this before, right? Exploit for which no patch exists. Vulnerabilities can be mitigated by making it as difficult as possible to exploit. And we'll talk more about this in the software security class. Typical software vulnerabilities, again, more on this in the software security class. Buffer heap stack overflows, violating memory safety, unvalidated input, SQL injections, race conditions, different kind of leakage, many of which means that there's some collusion or some access to a controlled channel that the attacker has. Many different angles. We'll talk about those in more detail in the following classes, just for you to get a bit of an overview or an idea. So as a quick summary for today, right? A threat is an unwanted action that creates negative impact. Cyber threats are carried out by attackers through an IT system, so it evolves some kind of information computing system. Think about the motivations, different levels of sophistication, and different levels or different techniques and different approaches. Think about the phone booth and the different basic principles that can be done, and the life cycle across risk assessment, policy establishment, implementation, and operation, and the Linux XZ backdoor as an example and case study. That's all for today. We're going to make this more interactive starting 2 weeks from now. We're going to have more interactive parts. Looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you.